So it seems like most of the folks have picked up AI in one fashion or another, and I love to see that. The one thing I do talk about a lot of folks is early innovation is going to be key, especially in the scrap game, especially in the game of recycling where everyone is so old school, I would say, or maybe consistent in old fashions or old traditions. And we've seen folks who picked up AI be able to move a little faster than some other folks here. So as far as the AI solutions go within GreenSpark, this is primarily what we're innovating for and really why we merged over here with our partners over here at ReMatter and we become ReSpark, because we want to do things that give you more time. Anything that can bring you back more time and give you ability to work with your partners or be able to do more business is ideally what we wanted to work for and sort of what we wanted to strive for here. So, gentlemen over there, sorry, I wanted to catch your, don't want to do crowd work here, but you did raise your hand in terms of being a little bit of pushback on AI. If you don't mind speaking candidly, would you mind telling me about maybe what it is that maybe makes you a little nauseous or maybe gives you a knot in the stomach when someone brings up AI with you?
I got it. Because of going towards the internet, I don't necessarily just for the result. But I say we're going the source of what it produces to verify. I did that. More time to the tune.
One step forward, two steps back. This kind of feels like that. Totally understand that. All right. And then other folks who have picked it up. I know someone raised their hand. I want to see if someone would mind talking about the benefits. He said there that it's a little bit about pushing back the Google, the information from anyone who has picked it up or innovated it. You know, if anyone wants to speak up there, I'd love to hear. At the same time, I also see that we have, Gordon, the founder of ReSpark, who's here as well. And I believe he's going to be here speaking, pretty shortly too. So, moving forward here is, we're going to have some folks joining up on the stage right here. I'll do some quick round of introductions. We have Gordon, who's going to be the CEO of ReSpark. We have, Wyatt, who's going to be the CTO of ReSpark. And then we also have Drake, who's going to be the president of ReSpark, all on the, chairs right here, talking a little bit more about innovation. So thank you guys for listening to me and entertaining me here for a little bit. And we're going to get started here in just a bit. All right, guys. Thank you everyone for the patience here. Want to introduce everyone one by one now. Now we have Drake, who is the president of ReSpark. We have Gordon, who is the CEO of ReSpark. And we also have Wyatt, who is the CTO of ReSpark. Without further ado, the ReSpark team.
Awesome. Appreciate you guys joining us. I appreciate the patience. It's been an interesting, and very fun day so far for the three of us. And obviously, you know, as of a week ago, you guys would be surprised for us sharing a stage. So we obviously want to make sure that, you know, we can kind of tell our story, obviously, tell, you know, you guys why we're so excited about the combination and kind of what it means for you guys in addition to a bunch of Q&A. So again, really appreciate the time. I'll let these guys introduce themselves as well.
Awesome. Yeah, great to be here with everyone. My name's Wyatt Pontius. As already mentioned, I'm the Chief Product Officer here at ReSpark. Was the co-founder and CEO of ReMatter before. And Drake, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, how's it going, everyone? And sorry, apologies again for the late start. Yeah, my name is Drake Hougo. I'm the current president of ReSpark and former co-founder of ReMatter, and I'm going to be moderating the panel today. Just a quick bit of context, obviously ReMatter and GreenSpark are two software systems that exclusively serve the scrap metal recycling industry. Respectively, have been at it for 5 or 6 years and announced as of last week that we're coming together. Really the goal of this panel, obviously we want to talk a little bit about the merger, and get your guys' thoughts on it, but then generally talk about innovation, technology. Arya was talking a little bit about AI at the beginning. The pace of change is so drastic, and beyond just, you know, scrap software and the tool you use for your business, we want to talk about a couple other technologies that we've implemented in our own business that have application to yards as well. So I guess, yeah, Gordon, Wyatt, to kick it off, like talk me through like why the merger happened, how it came to be.
Yep. Go for it. Yeah, I mean, I think not to try to tie a bow too cleanly on the entire conversation, but a lot of it is centered around, innovation resistance and honestly, say broadly speaking, innovation for the industry. You know, I've known both of these guys, over the last 5 or 6 years. We've developed a really close friendship, even before this, you know, this combination. And ultimately, you know, we decided that spending, you know, dollars competing against each other instead of spending dollars where they should be going into things like innovation and support for all of our customers. It wasn't a good trade-off. And ultimately, what we want to do is be, one of the businesses, hopefully across the entire industry that's central to, bringing folks into the next stage of technology, not now, not just for the next 12 months, but, through 2030, 2040, 2050, and so on and so forth. And, ultimately from a business of our size and scale, kind of, separate and apart or independently, there were trade-offs that we had to make, more or less every single day. And there was a pendulum that swung between things like innovation, that I'm sure that we'll get to, and support and deepening, all of the different workflows and functionality throughout each of our respective products. And, with ReSpark, that pendulum stops, right? We have the ability to, create something that neither side could manufacture independently. And that is to simultaneously run it, innovation and support, as a combined business together without choosing that overall trade-off. So I'm sure we'll get into some of the specifics around, the size and scale of the business, the overall product questions, but ultimately at a high level, we want to be, again, one of the core technologies in this industry for decades to come, and tackling that together instead of separate and apart, became very, very compelling.
Yeah, absolutely. Wyatt, anything else to add? Or
No, I think ultimately, when we talk about AI, we talk about innovation. I think it's an exciting time, but it can also be a time that brings anxiety. It's probably the biggest single technological transformation since the advent of the internet. And I'm sure everybody's businesses, have to varying degrees been impacted, of course, over time by that as well. So we obviously now have the opportunity to bring the brightest minds from both sides together into one team. And with that, have the opportunity to not just create great technology, but also create programs and have the personnel and the things and resources that we need to be able to actually utilize that technology in a way that creates value for your businesses, which I think is something that if we weren't able to do this merger would have been much, much harder to do. And technology ultimately only has value insofar as you can leverage it, right? And so I think that's what I'm most excited about, is being able to not just create these tools, but ultimately get them into the hands of the people that need it the most and can benefit the most from it every single day.
Awesome. And obviously, taking a step back from the merger, whenever any business is, shifting away from their existing scrap software, an HR tool, a payroll tool, people are rightfully nervous about making a software switch. How, in your guys' experience, obviously, spending 6 years selling, scrap software into the industry, do you help business owners and leaders get comfortable and equip them to prepare their staff for a tech switch?
Yep. I would take it. I think that the way that we speak about technology in different evaluations is there is, again, a lot of upside. The word innovation is all over the screen here, but ultimately, day one fit is the most important thing. And ultimately you guys need to be able to run businesses. You need to not have business interruption. Frankly, like we always joke, like if you guys aren't talking about your software system, that's probably a very, very good thing because things are running very, very well. That is ultimately our North Star throughout an entire transition. And sometimes it has everything to do with the product in terms of functionality and capabilities, but a lot of times it has to do with the human beings behind that product, and building relationships and confidence throughout the entire process is, again, just as important to Wyatt's point as the technology itself. It's only as good and it's only as powerful as the folks being able to leverage that. So ultimately that's kind of our goal. There is a lot of upside. There's a lot of optimization. And, what we try to communicate is, day one fit is the most important thing for any transition. It's not the only thing that should be a part of that eval, given the upside and given the optimization that, we've seen a lot of our customers undergo. And honestly, the most challenging thing is typically, getting folks on side and having the right procedures in place, not only on the ground, but also from the top down, the ability for us to work with a lot of folks in operations to help champion the implementation and not lose sight of why folks are doing this in the in the first place is honestly, I would say the biggest indicator of success.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well
And
said.
expanding on that, how do you assess day one fit? Because obviously, the procurement cycles for software in the scrap metal recycling industry don't happen that often for tools. Like, what would your recommendation be for folks who are procuring a software to assess, is that day one fit going to be good?
Yeah. Can we take it?
Go for it.
Great. Yeah, I mean, it all starts with information and just conversations with the team. I think that there needs to be alignment on what's fixed, or sorry, what is not broken, and what should maintain as the kind of status quo, and areas for optimization on day one. So ultimately, we get the benefit now of having a combined 12, 13, 14 year history. We've understood operations of all sizes and scale. And I think that the benefit of a combined entity is those data points. A lot of times it comes down to what you're using previously, right? The implementation between someone who hasn't ever used a system before and someone who's been running, another system for 20 or 30 years are fundamentally different things. And, our domain knowledge about where folks are coming from and ultimately meeting them where they are in whatever, software journey they are, is likely the most important. But it starts with conversations, and it starts with, prioritization from whoever we're talking to understand what's the most important thing to change and what's the most important thing to stay the exact same.
And how do you prepare a staff and communicate it once you've made the decision, regardless of whether it's a scrap software or another software tooling in the business? How would you recommend folks message that internally?
Yeah. Consistency in messaging is probably the most important thing. And consistency means commitment, right? And folks on both sides of the table, right? Folks like us, any folks in the business overall need to commit to that change. And again, at least to start, try to align on whatever playbook that is. I think that a lot of times in the implementation cycle, us collectively are spending a lot of time on standard operating procedures, right? How can you build workflows? How can you build processes around the tools and the platform that something like ReSpark provides? But ultimately it's the commitment to that procedure, and it's the commitment to the kind of, new way of doing things that is the most important whenever you're talking to teams or staff.
Yeah, that's good to know. And obviously, we are software vendors, but one of the things that I'm interested in is, even though we provide a product, like there's, a customer service, there's a partnership component. How do you recommend folks engage with their software vendors to make sure that they're getting full advantage of whatever tool it may be?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, as with many vendors, whether it's equipment, whether it's software, whether it's someone that just provided other services to you, like the tool itself is only half of the equation of what's meant by product, right? You can have a bunch of bits running on a computer. You can have a bunch of pixels on the screen. And ultimately, if you don't have the partnership and the folks that you need from the vendor side to actually help you get the value out of that, it's useless, right? It's a car without an engine. And so I think, as you're engaging with a vendor, just making sure you're understanding not just like, is this product a good fit for what I'm trying to solve for with my business, but do they have the resources and the personnel and the understanding of what actually needs to happen to make my team and my business successful, leveraging this tool to achieve the outcomes that I'm hoping to achieve, and making sure that, mutual action plans, timelines, making sure that you can get the confidence from the vendor that they know what they're talking about, and they're going to be with you every step of the way to guide you to success and ultimately getting the value out of the tool that you're hoping to get.
Yeah, I'd say the last thing too about visibility, back to codifying processes around SOPs, you also need to codify what communication lines look like to your vendor. Everyone knows that, there are loud voices in the room, there are quiet voices in the room, and making sure that the communication to your vendor is aligned with what the priorities of the overall business are. And that communication actually happens kind of like on your terms, is a really, really important part of the story.
Yeah, that's good to know. And obviously, one of the things I'm interested in hearing more about, regardless of what system you use, whether it's an accounting system, a scrap software, any system that holds data what are your recommendations for businesses like QuickBooks Desktop as an example, Intuit not really supporting it into the future, potentially having to migrate to a different accounting system? What's the recommendation to businesses who have, potentially a 20 plus year history of data as they think about switching to a tool that's potentially more modern to run their business off of?
Yeah. I mean, data is the lifeblood of the business, right? If you aren't, understanding what your customer trends are, if you aren't understanding what your pricing is, if you aren't, God forbid, understanding what your, accounts receivable and accounts payable looks like, you're going to have a really, really, difficult time. And so I think, in the same way that you need to have continuity with your end users' confidence to use the new product, you also need to understand that part of that coming back to day one fit. It's going to be a really consistent theme here. That on day one, you're not just going to be looking at a blank screen because great, the software is here, but where's all my data? Where are all my customers? Where are all my transactions? You need to be able to go home on, Saturday afternoon when the yard closes and come back in Monday morning with the new system up on the screen and just pick up like nothing left off. And so I think as it pertains to local systems, older, more legacy systems, potentially running on servers, things like QuickBooks Desktop, making sure that you have backup copies of that data, both locally, whether that's on a hard drive or on a computer somewhere, as well as potentially in a cloud somewhere, making sure that you have that redundancy and that you have portability of your data and can ultimately get it to where it needs to go is the number one priority. And then number two is just making sure that ultimately, again, you're working with somebody that has an understanding of how you're actually going to get that data into a spot that is useful and usable going forward. So it may be the case that whatever data structure you had in QuickBooks Desktop doesn't neatly transition into whatever new accounting system that you're going to use. But understanding that the vendor that you're working with to do that transition has been there before, has the playbook for getting that data over in a way that maintains the integrity and quality and accuracy of that data, and ultimately being able to do that in a timely manner and getting it where it needs to go so that it can be usable are the top three probably most important things in terms of making sure that's a successful transition.
Yeah. And how would you respond to folks who are worried about data security and vulnerability, especially making the shift? It's a very different situation when you have a server currently sitting on site. It's in your office. You can physically see it versus it being this more amorphous website that you log into.
Yeah. Well, local servers have all kinds of, security vulnerabilities as well, which we won't get too deeply into, but I think there are all kinds of best practices and protocols, whether that's like encryption, that protects your data from being seen, or hacked by, malicious users that probably shouldn't be accessing it. So making sure that your vendor has, a plan in place to make sure the data is encrypted, at rest and in motion, super important. And then ultimately understanding, I think one piece that doesn't get talked enough about as well is just like data backups and integrity, like needing to make sure that you can access, that data at any point in time, no matter what happens, right? If you have a bunch of data sitting somewhere on a server and that server, happens to crash and die, if you don't have a backup of that data somewhere, you're going to be in a really, really challenging spot. One of the benefits, of some of these cloud solutions, obviously, is that there's redundancy, right? You can have data backed up across multiple different data centers in different regions. And by the way, if you want to have a data, copy like backed up locally as well, that's potentially something that can be made available. So I think, if there's certifications, things like SOC 2, that basically certify that a particular vendor has met a very high standard for data security and best practices as well. Those are things that would be great to, get educated about and make sure that you're talking to your vendors about to make sure that they've gone through these best practices and are not just like, hey, I have this document that says I do this, but that they're actually practicing those best practices every single day to make sure that your data is protected, because it's the most arguably the most important asset behind people that a business has in 2026.
Yeah, the last thing I'd say too is there's obviously a big delineation between ownership of data and storage and maintenance, and maintenance of data. I would definitely recommend reading, your vendor's master services agreements to make sure that there is that clear, that kind of clear separation. It's not dissimilar to a bank, right? Just because you put money in a bank doesn't mean that they own your money. It means that they have an obligation to store and maintain, that money. And, if that's not very clearly spelled out in different vendor agreements, I would definitely, recommend taking a look at that.
one of the threads I want to pull on a little more, because you mentioned it earlier, is standard operating procedures. And obviously on the equipment side, you see that all the time. It's like, hey, when you get in the material handler, we need to do XYZ things. We need to fill out these maintenance forms before you operate that. Especially given that, a lot of roles within, businesses in the metal recycling industry are high turnover and do touch software. What are best practices that businesses can use to put standard operating procedures in place on the software side?
Yeah, I mean, I would throw it back in our face, right? Like that's part of our obligation as an overall vendor, to establish those with whoever we work with. And, the expectation should be that the standard operating procedures are, certainly influenced by the folks who are using the product, but the foundation is built in, whatever product you're actually using, because, candidly, like, if you don't have an ironclad standard operating procedure around the platform that you are working in, it says just as much about the platform itself than the overall, the overall procedure. So, ultimately, it should be a conversation between both sides, because there is no true, like, one size fits all model, but, you should be requiring from your vendor at least some foundation to build on that can then be configured by, the different nuances in any specific procedure in your op.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, there's, onboarding and implementation day one fit, and then there's success. We just say success never sleeps and success never stops. And if you have a vendor that's there and is a dynamic, partner to you as things change over time, it's not that a standard operating procedure is set in stone and then never, reevaluated again. So having someone that is there and can continue to be a dynamic partner that can grow and scale with your needs, I think is obviously a critical component to consider as well.
And talking about different learning styles, what have you guys seen be the most effective for teaching people how to use software? Is it written documentation? Is it videos? Is it them getting in the tools? Is it a combination of all the above?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's a combination depending on the actual person. I don't think that there's any substitute for reps though, which is why I mentioned before the consistency, whether it's top-down messaging or the consistency in application of those SOPs are the most important part to that success. I've seen folks pick it up, over help center videos, over articles, over Zoom sessions. Some folks just need you to sit next to them for an hour or two. And they will get that. But I think the common thread throughout that is enforcing consistency, not just from the vendor side, but also throughout the entire, the entire org. So that there really is no daylight between what's getting trained on and what actually happens.
Yeah, well said. Great. And let's pivot a little bit to AI. Obviously, it's the buzzy topic. You see it all throughout the news. I think one of the things that on the show floor that we've been hearing a lot about is AI is potentially going to impact the way that I'm interacting with my customers in a world where things are more automated. I'm losing that personal touch that, we've spent decades building that relationship with. How do you guys, recommend that a yard potentially messages that to their own customers?
Yeah, I think maybe to start and take a step back. AI has been in the news for, the last couple of years. It's been, getting developed on for the last, 6, 7, 8,
yeah.
if not longer. And I think that the first step is acknowledgement, right? It is, you need to acknowledge that this is here and candidly, it's probably here to stay. So maybe said differently, the strategy of, I'm just going to ignore it, is probably not the most compelling strategy. Now, what you want to do with that and how you want to utilize it both in your operation and in your supplier communications is going to be completely different based on organization, based on who you were dealing with. But step one is to just not ignore it. If you again look at the headlines, if you look at the quite literal infrastructure that's getting built around North America, around the world, this is here to stay. And now it is, how do we utilize this most effectively? And I think that, again, not to be more demanding from the vendors that you guys are using, but this should be a core part of the strategy for any vendor that you guys are taking a look at, because at least I'll speak for, this business. We think of it as an obligation, and we believe it's incumbent on us to help an industry like this step into what the next era of technology kind of looks like. And without a unified strategy, your messaging to either suppliers or customers is not going to be super consistent. That said, you need to be able to turn on or off what those levers look like when using AI in your business. Like a lot of our folks, at least starting off, they use them for internal purposes, right? Whether that's document ingestion, whether that's service requests, it doesn't necessarily need to extend to supplier communication. On the flip side, some folks are using, agents to answer the phone for dispatch service requests at 10 p.m. And ultimately that's probably not work that you guys want to do. So, there are ways to kind of pick and choose, but, it is honestly, I think relatively, it's very, very important for, a vendor to have a unified strategy, and then for you guys to have the freedom and flexibility to pick and choose from that strategy what to bring into to your operation. And it obviously doesn't have to happen overnight as well.
Yeah, I think ultimately, like as with any useful technology, it's a force multiplier. And so every business is going to be different. To the point Gordon just made, like the way that every business utilizes AI is going to be different, and how each business approaches their journey with AI over the coming years and decades is ultimately going to be different as well. Like the way that we at ReSpark have used AI like 2 years ago versus the way that we use it today is, quite frankly, night and day. You wouldn't even recognize it as the same thing. And with the rate at which technology is progressing, I think the number one most important thing is just that you have a trusted partner that is staying on the cutting edge of what's available, and also is able to be a translation partner to help you understand not just like, okay, what is this new model? What is this new technology? But how can I apply it to my business in a way that generates value and minimizes negative externalities? The goal isn't to like, hey, I never want to talk to any of my customers or suppliers ever again. If that was the case, maybe you shouldn't be running a yard. But I think people not wanting to pick up the phone at 10 p.m. or not being able to, and ultimately being able to provide actually a better touch point and experience for that person, because now they know that they're being heard and they're not just going to voicemail is where that force multiplier like really kicks in. The other piece obviously being internal, like what can we put into the hands of our employees to empower them to do more with the same amount of time that they have in the day? AI isn't increasing the day beyond 24 hours, but what it can do is ultimately like make it so that you can do more with those hours that you're putting in, and hopefully free up more time for you to go live a fulfilling life and do the things that you want to do and continue to build those customer and supplier relationships. So I actually see it as a net benefit, when applied correctly and thoughtfully.
Yeah, follow-up question, two-part question. First, what is an agent and what can they do? And the second part, going back to what you were saying with, someone picking up the phone, why should a business get comfortable with an AI, not a human, answering a phone call? Why, if you want to start with the agent.
Yeah, I can talk about what an agent is. So, I mean, show of hands, like how many people have used like Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude at some point in their life? Maybe like every single person in here. So ultimately, when you're using one of those tools, you are sort of acting as an agent and you're giving a prompt, and then there's some output that comes back to you in the form of text. And I think the way to think about an agent is that it's not just a one-time interaction or input, but it's something that can actually follow a series of logical steps to complete a more complex workflow beyond just answering a simple question or query. So you can imagine an agent being, someone calls into the yard. We're just going to go back to this well again. Someone calls into the yard at 10 p.m. They're going to use their voice to ask some question or request a service. That might kick off an agent, which basically says like, hey, I'm understanding what this person is saying. I understand that they are asking for a dispatch service to happen tomorrow. I understand that in order to complete that request, I need to go into, the software system and create, this dispatch request that ultimately a human's going to come in and review in the morning and put that onto the load board. And so it's really just a series of steps that you can train an AI to do to accomplish a more complex workflow on your behalf. I don't know if you want to take part two in terms of, what that means.
Yeah, the follow-up question, why should a business get comfortable with an AI picking up the phone?
Yeah, I mean, the business should get comfortable only when they're ready, right? And I think that, again, the burden of proof for these tools is on the tools themselves. And, ultimately we talked about how this isn't going away. It's not going away for a reason because it is so powerful. But, what vendors like us are at least trying to do, is give you guys the tools to get as comfortable as possible before releasing this to either your internal teams or your customers or suppliers. And, at the end of the day, it still needs to pass the, human tests. And I think that giving customers and folks the freedom and flexibility to ensure that they can test these processes and tools, and again, back to a unified AI strategy, choose whether or not they want to power internal teams versus external requests. That's the most important part.
And speaking from personal experience with AI, obviously I hear about the plethora of use cases and benefits, but I feel like something I experienced that, is probably true of many folks in the room is I know this is powerful. I don't exactly know how to apply it to my business though. I'm curious to see what have been some of the cooler use cases of AI that you've seen in the customers that you guys have interacted with.
Yeah, I'm happy to start.
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, it's again, not to go back to law again. I think that the dispatch agent is probably the cleanest use cases, we've seen. We have customers who are, creating dispatch requests with a human in the loop to still approve, modify, or reject those requests. A majority of those are going through the dispatch agent, and over 60% of those are getting created without any modifications. And I think when you really think about what these tools are, it's not just, document ingestion. It's not just filling out fields. The ability to one click create something that hit your email, without any modifications simply just wasn't possible prior to that. The other, I'd say, big one that we've seen that we kind of released to the public, over the last couple of days is our anomaly viewer. For anyone who's taking a look at either, tickets for different grading operations or, internal audit controls probably knows the spot check method, which is, spending 30, 45, or an hour a day or a week spot checking different tickets and trying to understand discrepancies or anomalies either on the weight side or the overall grading side. Someone over the weekend said, hey, I'm back to your point about living fulfilling lives. I'm out to lunch with my fiance right now at noon instead of spot checking tickets because of this anomaly viewer. Not to get super philosophical, but that's why we're doing this. And obviously that's super powerful. So, some of the impact is felt pretty immediately. Some of the impact is actually felt very, very, very personally.
Yeah, I would just add, I think one of the other main use cases of any software system, of course, is to gather, organize, and then interpret data, right? Whether it's scale ticket photos, whether it's pricing information, whether it's past contact points with that new supplier that you're just trying to nail down and buy their loads from them. Previously, that might have involved downloading a bunch of spreadsheets and writing a bunch of formulas and doing a bunch of work to try to figure out what you're looking for. And now, obviously, with the analytical tools, with AI at the tip of the spear and natural language, just being able to say, hey, what should I do to try to win this account? Why have we not been successful? And being able to pool historical data to say, hey, when your sales rep actually called these accounts on Tuesdays, their hit rate was way higher. Those are the types of insights that, at least I'm not smart enough that I would have ever figured out on my own. And, with AI, obviously, now we can get more out of the time and effort that we're putting into anything and really distill those insights out, to again, hopefully allow more Saturday lunches with the fiance.
I think the last thing I'd say too is you mentioned, these tools are really powerful, but sometimes, you either hear or, you personally are like, hey, I'm not entirely sure how to use this. I would flip it on its head and say, demand that from your vendor, right? Mm-hmm. Tell them to tell you how this should be, very applicable to your overall business. And again, I would be very curious as to what their overall answer is, because again, that should be an obligation of the vendor to apply those use cases to your actual business.
Perfect. And we have about 5 more minutes before we open it up to a Q&A. One of the common themes that, hearing around the conference and stuff is businesses are trying to grow, obviously, especially in the scrap metal recycling industry. The way that you do that is through increased material flows. How can AI really help companies outside buyers and the folks who, are driving around knocking on new doors go win new accounts, to help get that volume into the yard?
Yeah. I mean, we're working on some stuff. I won't get, too promotional. But a tool that we call Supply Radar, where essentially you can partner up your, buyers to give them this interface with AI to help them actually identify opportunities for buying, in the geographic area where you're trying to increase your volumes. And I think that's really just, the tip of what's possible. There's all kinds of I know I was talking to someone earlier who uses Zoom Info for contact enrichment for their buyers to go find contact information and be able to pursue those accounts. And now they've actually pivoted to using Claude, for the same use case. So I think if we just think about, AI and I guess agents, in particular, again, as something that's able to take a well-defined workflow and execute that end to end. Putting it in so that the buyer can, actually just come in on a Monday morning and say, hey, here's 5 new leads that, ReSpark, Supply Radar has identified for you. And they can add those to their call list and start working those accounts. Just a super practical implementation that gives them more leads to work and hopefully more volume to chase.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd say too, without getting too deep into the details, is you can use AI to compete on service and compete on information and not compete on price. And that is an unlock that, we obviously think is super, super powerful.
Yeah. And digging, my next question was actually going to be around pricing. A lot of customers, a lot of scrapyards, it's not uncommon for them to call, their local buyers in the region, get multiple price lists together, see where the market is locally, and then make decisions off of that. How can they use AI to speed that process up? Because that's a very common workflow that we hear yards do, and it's pretty much happening manually in Excel.
Yep. And I think, that's AI's bread and butter, right? Taking unstructured data and turning it into structured data. So I don't know, 2-3 years ago, you could probably throw PDFs into ChatGPT and it would give you something. I think now with a lot of these tools, and again, not to get, too marketing heavy, but in something like ReSpark, not only can you do that, but I think the big unlock of having these embedded within your actual core operating system is the level of context that can be provided to these documents. Rather than just getting a side-by-side of pricing, you can immediately compare that to what you're buying these materials at. You can immediately compare that to what's in your inventory and start load planning. So I think that, that's a really good example of how technology that's been around over time, the utility and the value that you can get from that is supercharged given the context that you can provide it when it's fully embedded into the tools that you're using every single day.
Great. And final question, obviously in line with the theme of this conversation, how have you guys encouraged AI usage of your team, respectively? And how would you recommend yards who, because a lot of the folks in this room, probably have used these tools, but maybe some members on their staff or teammates haven't. How do you encourage adoption of AI tooling across the board?
Yeah. I think ultimately, it's a totally human reaction to have a little bit of fear of the unknown. And so if there's a new tool that somebody hasn't used before, I think, the best way to ultimately encourage adoption is to turn that unknown and to break it down into smaller pieces that are digestible and feel more comfortable, right? So we talked about in the same way that you're onboarding to a new software vendor, you need to do the training. You might need to read help center articles. You might need to attend webinars, ultimately being there, and letting them know, hey, here's all the different ways that this might be applicable to you. Let's just focus on this one use case to start. How do we break this down into a really simple problem that you can get comfortable with and understand, hey, this isn't that scary anymore, right? It's not just this bar staring back at me that I can type literally anything in the world into and I have no idea what's going to happen. All I need to do is click this button and it's going to reveal, 5 suppliers that I should be reaching out to. And you're like, wow, this is actually a technology that can really help me do better at my job and add more value to the business that I work for. So breaking it down into bite-sized pieces, really making it contextually relevant to the individual, is super important because within the context of our company, right? The way that a salesperson uses AI and the way that an engineer uses AI, you would think it was from completely different planets. And that's fine because it's a very versatile technology but you need to take something that's inherently vast and ambiguous and turn it into something that's very concrete and familiar to get people comfortable with using it and realizing the value that it can achieve. And then maybe expanding out from there to get more out of the tool.
Yeah, it's a last thing too is like you always want to be operating in context where you can trust but verify what that agent's doing, because ultimately, the curve of technological advancement, specifically with AI, is already outpacing the adoption curve, and bringing in tools that help you adopt while using this is going to be crucial. The second thing I'd say is when you get to the point of comfort, these tools should be default on. And what I mean by that is the happiest path, right? The SOP that you guys are developing, those should be built around these AI tools. It shouldn't be an alternative path to doing something. It should be that kind of like default on switch.
Awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate it, guys. Well, we have about 5 minutes for Q&A. I want to turn it over to the audience. Don't worry about running up to the microphone. It's not super crowded in here, so if you have any questions, just feel free to shout it out.
So when you're talking about using agents, and I'm specifically thinking of the folks that I have gotten more, clearly more advanced in what they're able to do. I'm not so much worried about me using it for a tool, but how my customers on the outside, because of course, what do? You had a lot of people who just get frustrated and yell agent. So you get a live person. So that's where I would find some resistance. It's not how I can use it. It is the interface with my customers on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course. And again, I think I'll go first. I'll pass it over to these guys. But like the burden of proof needs to be on the tool. And honestly, like you should definitely check it out at some point. But like these agents are like us having a conversation. It's not press 2 for pickup, press 3 for swap. So it's. We would not be so excited about these things if we hadn't thought that either the gap is almost there or we've exceeded the gap of functionality. Said another way, hopefully it doesn't come across like this. Like we don't want to espouse what's possible or espouse what might be on the come if something gets figured out. I think part of, innovation and innovation resistance is like we're already there. We're already at the point where, voice AI is effectively indistinguishable from talking to a human being. Like, I'm sure, I hope that I'm funnier than the agent, but like ultimately in terms of things like dispatch requests, like we wouldn't be so excited if we didn't see that value, but we totally acknowledge that the burden of proof is on these tools and it needs to look and feel and hear, like a human being on the line.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is like, if you took a look at what some of these tools could do 3 months ago and what they can do today, in some cases, it's quite literally night and day of a difference. Ultimately it's up to us and other software vendors to decide like, hey, which of these technologies are at the point in the maturity curve where it can be a great experience? Because ultimately the burden of proof is to be better than the alternative. So if somebody's calling in at 10 p.m. and the alternative is to leave a voicemail, is this experience going to be better than that, or is it going to be worse? And if the answer is that it's going to be worse, we shouldn't be selling it, because ultimately we're here to add value, not frustrate people. And so I think that, is really the most important, aspect, that, the burden of proof should be on us as software vendors to really help shepherd things that are net positive value and ultimately, hold back the things that might not quite be there yet until the time is there for them to be ready.
I guess I look at it as, well, the outside customer is, they try fish, they hate all the fish. So if they try one system, they hate all the systems. No matter how good the system is. And I know it'll die 1, 2, 3 years from now, maybe sooner. Every moment with dust is that's why I like the gap there.
Yeah, no, I think it's completely fair. And I also think that, again, around that kind of unified AI strategy, we have tons of folks who are using the email dispatch agent without the voice agent, right? So it also might be a sequencing process of, hey, let's get comfortable seeing emails come in or, requests to the supplier portal come in and get drafted via the agent. Or let's see the portal requests come in and hit, AI route optimization. and then kind of, QC that against what we typically prioritize on the overall load side. So again, a big part of this might be just as much sequencing as are we at the threshold of whether or not this makes a ton of sense. And I think that, making sure that your AI agents or technologies or however you use it is embedded within your core operating system to ensure that that context enrichment and the performance you're getting from it is as valuable as possible. I don't want to speak for you guys, but I actually think that that's way more important than using every inch of any AI tool out there. Because that's going to just come over time.
I think that is much that if I were to mention that disadvantage opinion enter 60% of the requests for contemplated. So talk about the 40% and amount of creation that needed to be made. And my experience with AI tools are really good at learning from their mistakes.
Yeah.
So I'll quickly fix it.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the good distinction here is mistakes versus instructions that were not in the original email, or candidly, like what's in a dispatcher's mind. And I'd say that 40% delta, a lot of that are pieces of context that aren't in an email. Like let's say assigning to a driver, right? That would be a full modification that the dispatcher might just want control over. It might be adjusting a scheduled date, but to your point about the models, like it's really hard to demo, but a lot of our customers are feeling this day in and day out. The models do learn over time. And I think a good example is like ASAP doesn't mean the same thing from two different people, right? ASAP might mean 5 minutes if it's one of your biggest suppliers. It might mean like next Tuesday if someone always says ASAP. And that's the type of, that's the type of distinction that these agents can actually learn very, very well from. Because if you say ASAP and actually turn it to Tuesday versus, this afternoon, the agent will actually learn from that. But I think to your point about the 40%, a lot of that is actually context that either dispatchers have or folks using these tools want to impress upon that service rather than like a 60% accuracy rate. So it's a really, really good call out. And hopefully that kind of context is helpful.
Yeah, and for those who couldn't hear, the question was around AI adoption when you're facing resistance with partners externally.
Yeah, specifically on the environmental impacts. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah. I mean, first off, I think it's a completely understandable reaction, right? I think without getting too deep into like the macroeconomics of like global energy trade and everything, there are companies that are actively working right now on trying to make this like as sustainable a technology as possible. So for example, there's a company, I won't throw names out to get commercial here, but there's a company out there that basically is, putting in like on-demand data centers. So they're not actually powered on all the time, but when there's actually negative electricity costs because, there's a surplus of like energy generation, at that point in time, the thing gets powered on and you'll power like, on-demand workflows, using AI. So I think there's lots of great ideas and like innovative ways that we can approach, powering this technology that obviously should be a great benefit to all of us in a way that doesn't, destroy the environment. There's also, a lot of effort and energy going into like, without again getting too deep into stuff like, nuclear energy plants, like much cleaner ways that we can generate, this power to power this technology. So I think in the same way that we've seen all kinds of different technologies evolve over time. And I think like the automobile is a really good example, right? It went from like pretty freaking disgusting to like, cool, at least now we have a catalytic converter, to now like everybody in Norway just drives a Tesla that's completely powered by like hydroelectric energy. And like, I think what we're probably going to see with AI is a similar adoption curve over time in terms of the sustainability of the technology and how we can deliver it in a way that is ultimately holistically a net positive for humanity. Because again, if it's not leading us to lead more fulfilling lives and helping us out, at a total level, not just a financial level, then I think you would argue that maybe it's not that great of a technology after all.
Yeah, thank you.
That's a question. Yeah, probably time for one or two more questions. Any takers? All right. Well,
Awesome.
yeah, Gordon, Wyatt, thank you guys so much for being up on this panel. Really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone who came out, and I hope you have a great rest of the show.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thanks, guys.